Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our new career development webinar, which is entitled Importance of Diversity in STEM. Let's get everyone settled for just a minute and we'll get started. Okay, I see some people are still joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started. We do want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on YouTube. Before we get started, I'll be giving a brief intro into NRMN, the National Research Mentoring Network, and our partners in today's webinar, the Social Scientist community. Founded in 2014, NRMN is an NIH grant-funded initiative whose entire purpose is to diversify the STEM workforce. We do this by providing researchers across all career stages in the biomedical, behavioral, clinical, and social sciences field with evidence-based mentorship and professional development programming that emphasizes the benefits and challenges of diversity, inclusivity, and culture. Our program achieves that through mentorship, networking, and professional development through our online networking platform, My NRMN, which has over 22,000 mentors and mentees. We encourage you all to visit our website, nrmnnet.net, to learn more about our resources. For this webinar, NRMN collaborated with the social scientist community to bring together a panel on diversity in STEM. Hear from our mentors from the social scientist community as we discuss the current state of DEI and how we need to both encourage and retain underrepresented communities in the STEM fields. NRMN is delighted to provide this opportunity for everyone to participate in this webinar, and we have your questions directly answered by the social scientist community team. We will be offering a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so we encourage you to type any questions you may have in the Q&A feature down below. And lastly, from NRMN, we want to give a special thank you to the social scientist community for making this webinar happen. And now I will pass it over to Danielle Tomasello for the webinar to begin.
Hi, everyone. Sorry. My name is Danielle. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Whitehead Institute at MIT. And I'm also the founder and creator of the Social Scientist. So I just wanted to take you through our website here. So we are a virtual one-on-one mentorship for the STEM community. And the idea that we have for the social scientists is to provide this community to the entire public. So everyone from young students all the way up to experts have the opportunity to speak with our enthusiastic mentors. And we want to be freely available and to encourage all of those interested in STEM. And we hope that in that way, we can kind of break down barriers for those that don't have the type of mentorship that they need to kind of facilitate their STEM degrees and their interests. So on our website, if you can take a look at our awesome mentors, you can look at different areas in academia, engineering, and so for instance, if we take a look at writing and communications, you can see we have Justin here from Open Biome. So taking a look at his page, you can see a little bit about his background, and then you can contact Justin directly and try to set up a time to chat and help kind of discuss your STEM interests. So I'm going to introduce our awesome panel here. So first, we have Clarice Ilio. She is an assistant professor at UCLA and quantum engineer. Then we have Andre Walcott. He is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Advance Credit Union. We have Zainab Kaku. She's a Senior Associate Scientist at Janssen, and she is studying T-cell therapy. We have Jamal Williams. He is a postdoctoral fellow at UCLA and a neuroscientist. And we also have Justin Chen. He's the Director of Communications at Open Biome. So we're all really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to talk to everyone. And so we're going to start off with asking questions for the panel. So to start off, I'd like to ask, do you believe that implemented programs to increase DEI in STEM are beneficial? And anyone can jump in.
Hello. Yeah, so I think that there has been considerable effort for DEI initiatives across different types of institutions. And I think there's funding, there's resources, there's departments. But I definitely think that to really tackle the problem that these offices are trying to tackle, the representation matters. And so having people sensitive enough that understand the issues deeply, be the representative for these DEI offices would make a bigger impact than I think some institutions have seen so far. Because in my opinion, I think we have to get to the root of why we need such offices. And those things, one of those things, in my opinion, is the climate. And so if we really don't tackle kind of the pervasiveness of different biases and systemic biases and really change the climate, then I think that DEI offices will be often isolated and not really have the range or the latitude to do their jobs. But I think that we need them, and I think they could be really useful, but sometimes they may need retooling.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, Jamal, I 100% agree with that. And one thing I've noticed, to give you some context, I used to be at Oregon Health and Science University as a program manager for 2 diversity enhancing programs. So I have a pretty extensive background in program development, program implementation at a higher education institution. But one thing that I noticed kind of across the board is that a lot of departments or kind of DEI specific departments and programs, they're kind of lacking in a lot of resources. There's not a lot of people. I'll say one of the programs that I helped manage that we didn't even have a full 1.0 FTE covered for the whole thing for between like 3 of us. And so I think that's one of the issues is that we have maybe the drive and we want, like, a lot of people want to do it, but they just don't have the resource to actually do it. And then it leads to higher rates of burnout. I can say that for myself too. It was definitely got tough at times because there wasn't enough resources and we're kind of spread pretty thin. And so if we really want to do kind of this DEI programmatic DEI kind of stuff, you really have to make sure that the resources are there and that we're not just kind of checking boxes, because I feel like a lot of institutions across the board have a tendency just to check boxes and say like, hey, we did this, great, we did what we needed to do, and that was it. So I think the programs are beneficial for kind of the individuals, but like Jamal said, we really need to retool what they look like and what resources they're actually receiving.
Yeah, and if I may, I'm in a big university. I completely agree with what both of you have said. And I think that many times big institutions do not walk the talk, right? And whereas I am very hopeful for the younger generation that they, I think, understand why it's important and necessary for a thriving scientific community to have representation, right? I think that I fear for the people who actually hold the rule book now, right? The older generation, the older guard, who are the people who are making those decisions of not giving enough resources for the DI offices. I think that I would like, and I would have liked, and I will like one day to see a little bit more investment from the decision makers who are in power right now. So many times people in academia say that science advances one death at a time, right? Maybe DEI advances one death at a time, but I don't think we should go there, or I hope we do not need to go there, and that actually there are near-term investments that actually get done. And again, and I would like to maybe ask my fellow panelists if anyone has an idea on how to get there, on how to implement those changes in policy right on in the near term.
Well, one thing, and I can again completely agree with everyone. One thing I can say is I've met with the MIT Bio has a new DEI office, and same thing. There's pretty much one person. She's super stretched for resources. But what I kind of see when kind of planning the action is essentially dealing with pushback from the professors and kind of like how to overcome that. And it's kind of like we shouldn't really even be dealing with pushback. So pretty much if we can, on your level, if you can really encourage like how important it is that we all need to do it, that could also kind of help move things along.
I think one of the things I've also noticed, in addition to like the lack of resources, is so at my previous job, we had a summer internship program, and the student that came through mentioned that she was one of maybe 3 or 4 that even applied throughout her whole school. So I think, I don't know if it's the lack of interest or they just don't know, or it's something that's an option for them. So I think that's also something that's preventing people from getting into these programs or utilizing the ones that are there.
So then why don't we discuss how we can better educate the community on these disparities. So going from the academic level and then going outside, like Z was talking about, internships.
I think it really starts, I mean, of course, it starts at the leadership level. It starts kind of also at the faculty level. Like one example is, I mean, how are we kind of assessing individuals when they're to get into graduate school or into these internships? And like, what is the framework we're using to really do that? Because I think that's one of the biggest things is, I mean, I've been in admissions conversations where they were like, yeah, we have this DEI framework that we're using, but they're not actually really using it. They're not being trained on using it. And so they get into these conversations about, oh, well, this person is better than this person kind of way. And like, it's so subjective. It's subjectivity for sure. And that is one of the biggest things. And of course, everyone has bias, but I think we need to acknowledge that bias when we are kind of going into admissions in general, and we are coming into these conversations and recognizing your own bias and recognizing other people's bias as well. And when those people who are kind of creating those barriers, having the power and the ability to actually be like, hey, you're doing this, you shouldn't be doing this, or removing that person from that committee. And I think that's one of the biggest things is a lot of people are they're so stuck on, I don't want to hurt someone's ego or hurt someone's feelings, but that then leads to the disparities growing even more. And I think that's one of the issues that we have to educate individuals on the disparities and kind of what they're doing to increase those disparities.
So Andre, what do you think of the bias training that they have like available online? I kind of see that a lot of like, well, here are some resources online. Do you think that's actually helpful?
I think that a lot of bias training is, again, going back to, is very checkboxy. They tend to do an hour bias training and like, hey, look, our campus is 90% of our campus went through unconscious bias training. That was 1 hour long. And it's just someone telling you kind of like, this is how you recognize bias, but they never do a follow-up. There's no, let's talk about it 3 months from now. Let's talk about 6, 9, 12. Let's talk about 2 years from now. What have you changed in your everyday life, and what has your organization changed? And so making sure that you have kind of consistent conversations around it will kind of bring it back up. And so of course, bias is always going to be there. I mean, it's human nature to kind of in group out group, we have biases towards individuals for other part of the out group, towards your own group. But I think that is something that you need to follow up and be consistent when you are having kind of these educational workshops, and not just a one-off, which you tend to see across DEI everywhere in and out of academia.
This is a slightly
go for it.
different train of thought, but hopefully, not too crazy. But so for context, I was a grad student from 2012 to 2018 in a biology program, and I felt like we had all these classes like on like how scientists use yeast, like all these old-fashioned techniques and stuff to like build up our fundamentals, but we never really studied science as an institution and like the history of science. And I think just having I'm still missing that today, like having that more foundation of like, this is how the institution developed. It doesn't have to be this way, maybe it's semi-arbitrary, or this is historically how it ended up, and here's how it's changed. And I feel like as a grad student, I was so focused on like doing my own experiments in my lab, and like that was my main focus. And I don't feel like we really felt empowered to like challenge the system in any way. It was more like, how can we best work within the system to benefit ourselves? And it's not like anybody told us that, it's just like the atmosphere. And I think just knowing that like there's a possibility to change things, and things don't exist this way for a good reason, or here are the reasons why, and maybe some of them are good, some of them are bad. Like just having that mindset to compare to would have been really nice.
I love that. I think that people still resist the idea that science is political, right? That whatever you choose to research, the people you choose to work with, the things that you do in the lab every day, they end up being political to some extent, right? And I think this is bad, and I would have loved to have this sort of ethics class, like during grad school, during undergrad, like thinking about science and who gets science done. And for example, I would just like to point out that even what type of science gets funded to get done is political, right? The people, if you have homogeneous bunch of people making the decisions on whose science merits funding, you end up like saying that yes, this science is good, this science is not, and you end up with things that are sanctioned by the community, things that are not sanctioned by the community, and you end up even missing good things to look at, to think about, just because the funding environment does not allow. So I think it's all super very intertwined, and especially in the hard sciences in STEM, right? People tend to think, no, it's not political at all. It is. All science, all human endeavor is political, and the sooner we start admitting this, I think the sooner it's going to be better for everyone, and even for like EDI in general.
I'd like to go back to Justin, when you were talking about kind of the history of science, and give a shout out to Jamal, who has this awesome podcast called Reclaim the Bench. So it's essentially, he has been trying to give a voice to those scientists who have been marginalized and not shown in history, what they have done for science. And it's really awesome to kind of see the scientists that should have gotten the recognition that haven't.
Thanks, Danielle. and Justin, yeah, I was like I was always very curious about like who were the people behind the ideas. Actually, it's still kind of a hobby of mine, and maybe a spinoff podcast is coming that I'm working on and trying to interview like thought leaders behind science and technology. But it's something that I kind of kept up with along the way, and I think that's an interesting perspective, and it kind of incorporates into my response. Um, if we can understand that science is more unknown than known, I think it kind of gives these kind of avenues for people to feel like they can jump in. The question was, how can we better educate the community about these disparities? I think the community knows that the disparities exist, but they just don't know that how they can be integrated within that system. And so us as scientists or science communicators or administrators, I don't know how and what medium we can do it necessarily, but making sure that we communicate science as something that we need all hands on deck, because anybody who's a scientist know that it's not made up of super highly intellectual genius type people. It's people who's just super curious and well, the good ones, really curious and really like passionate about what they want to do, and the messaging of we really need you, whoever you are, no matter where you're from. We need all hands on deck to advance science, to advance medicine, mathematics, computer science. I think that messaging may be more of a welcoming to individuals who feel like they're on the outside.
Kind of going with that messaging also is kind of who, like kind of going that piece of representation, who's there giving those talks, who's in those conversations. And Jamal, I think that's awesome that you're kind of bringing up light to who created some of these things that we all know as scientists and then don't actually know the whole background of them. And actually putting the image of the person next to like, hey, this is the person that did it. Hey, this is an African-American who made this kind of discovery, but we never talk about those things. We talk about who are the individuals that are like currently in the field doing the work. And that person gets the claim to fame to a sense. And so like really changing that mentality that there's other people who started these things and remembering who they actually are.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that would go a long way, especially with the younger generations, to be able to kind of see who was in the past and the history behind and how we got this far, as opposed to the people that are out there now.
Great, thanks everyone. So now let's ask, how can we increase retention of underrepresented communities in STEM?
So I'll just say something quick first to give a shout out to NRMN and the Social Scientists. I think using modern technology and modern platforms to give voices to people from all different type of backgrounds is a much more efficient way to help individuals going through the struggle or navigating graduate school or high school or undergraduate, be able to link to a mentor and kind of have that guidance. And the person may prefer somebody who looks like them, or they may not, but being able to use technology and social platforms, I think you have a more likelihood that you can connect with somebody else. And so just like my answer to the first question, I think representation matters. And I think there's been a lot of focus on how do we recruit underrepresented minorities into science. But to be quite honest with you, at least at the academic level, which is the level that I'm most familiar with, a lot of institutions aren't ready to even bring in those students. The environment is not conducive for students who have never really been a part of the establishment to integrate, to learn, to thrive. So unfortunately, we do need to put a lot of emphasis on retention. And I think that has to do with culture. I think that has to do with representation. And I think that has to do with, going back to your first question, DEI offices having the resources they need, and institutions, being able to kind of creatively get everybody on board, not just one office working really hard to solve a super historical complex issue, but the institution taking responsibility that everybody needs to be involved.
I really want to say just like dismantle the whole thing and then rebuild it, but that's a big theory that we'd all love to happen, but it's not going to. But I mean, one specific thing that I'm trying to think of or thinking of is like understanding, like kind of piggybacks off what Jamal said, kind of understanding just different learning styles of different individuals, and like, hey, like I don't need to sit in a lecture for 2 hours in a class. I want to do hands-on stuff. Yeah, we have lab courses, but there's still always that lecture piece that people love to talk about. Honestly, I mean, a lot of people when they're lecturing, they only talk about their own science, especially in graduate school. And I'm like, I don't really need to know about what you're doing. I mean, I do, but I don't need to know like the specifics. Like, don't read me your paper out of PowerPoint. Like, I got it. I can read it myself. But just really being cognizant that people are different. No one's a monolith. Like, just because we say like, oh, underrepresented minorities in underrepresented groups, like not all those groups learn the same. And so how can we really structure and tailor our education to specific individuals and not be this broad blanket of, hey, because you are in this program, you're going to learn X, Y, and Z, and that's going to be it, kind of thing. And I mean, I see that with also a lot of funded programs across the board. I mean, you tend to see, like when I was working, I was a program manager for a prep program, and preps are amazing. I'm like fully supportive of like prep programs, but I don't think that they should be kind of across all organizations and all institutions. They tend to copy each other, and they tend to just sit there and like, oh, well, this organization did it, so I'm gonna do the same way, and it kind of just goes through each one. But how can I have a program that is only a graduate school organization? How is that compared to an institution that has undergrads and graduate? So that's going to be two different kind of environments. So we need to make different kind of programs specific to those. And I think that, yeah, you can get tips and tricks from other programs and other organizations, but you really need to tailor it to your organization to really retain the individuals in STEM.
And I just want to mention that I completely agree with what Andres said, that people bring in different kinds of intelligences, and academia currently only value a very specific set of intelligence usually, right? So the type of intelligence that does well for grades and stuff, like from lecture courses. And I think that it is important, like it's a part of a much broader conversation, but it is important to start trying to integrate other intelligences, like, because in the scientific endeavor, yes, we need people who can perform well in tests and stuff, but we also need different people who think differently and who bring things to the table that are not currently valued. For example, I find it absurd that to this date, there are still like PhD programs that have a GPA cutoff, right? Like students are just not considered. If you want to consider a student who doesn't have like a certain GPA, it's like an uphill battle, right? So so a little thing such as eliminating GPA cutoffs would go a long way already.
I think one of the things that could also help with retention or encouraging individuals to come into this field is making them feel prepared, and kind of goes back to the last question that we talked about, is showing them that the pioneers of this industry look like them, and showing them that they can do this and they can go down this route and be successful in it. I think that would go a long ways, giving them the confidence that it's an option for them.
I agree with Zainab. I've actually read a couple of articles and have kind of generally seen in academia that while we'll have those underrepresented students that fought their way to become graduate students aren't retained to postdocs and professors, and they're saying that they're not even applying for those positions because they're not confident enough that they can obtain those type of positions. So is this something, do you agree that we really need to just more encourage and set up a better atmosphere to encourage those students to continue on.
I think that also pulls in what Clarissa was just saying about the GPA cutoffs. Like maybe if you do take those away, and it pulls in more diverse group of people, and then you can play off their strengths because they might have a different strength, and that could tie back and maybe improve their GPA in a different way.
Can I make another comment? Andre, I really agree with the sentiment of dismantle the whole thing if we could, but actually I think that we may not have to dismantle it because I think learning styles have been people have discovered more about their own learning styles, and institutions have discovered more about learning styles since COVID. And I think, like you said, sometimes a professor might teach a particular class. This has definitely happened to me, where the topic is really based on like their particular research. But I think the future is really being able to package together your own degree, like what classes you want. I mean, I hated going to class, and if anybody agrees with the next statement, give me an emoji or something in the chat so I don't feel alone. But when I listen to lectures or seminar, I at the speed that people are talking, I sometimes really feel like, how much did I actually get out of that lecture or that conversation? So as a student, I had to double down. I had to go through the attendance portion, and then I had to actually go figure out how I learn and learn in that way. And I think that being able to put together classes, like have the learner be able to put together what they want to create their degree, may be a more innovative platform. Aside from me hating to go to class, I think since I finished my PhD, I probably still maybe finished like 12 or 13 classes online, because that's what I'm actually interested in, but I wasn't necessarily interested in the botany class that I had to take as an undergraduate, for example. So that's all I had to say.
Kind of piggybacking on Clarissa's observation that, funding is political, I think, funding more diverse projects too. So at Open Biome, not to like pull my work experience in too much, but we work with gut microbes and how they can be used to help treat certain like diseases or human indications. And a lot of it is, a lot of microbiome research, for example, is done on like Western populations, or like inflammatory bowel disease, or diseases that affect, industrial wealthy countries. And there's all these other great uses like malnutrition or typhoid that we could be doing, but there's no research funding because those countries are low income, middle income. And like, I feel like if you want to engage these communities, help people be retained, it's like if you research issues that matter to them more, or they can see, that their research isn't just going to help the establishment, they can also help their community too. I think that could be, not for everybody, but for some people that could be a powerful draw to, help encourage them to stay with their research and their program.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, Justin. That's like something that I'm seeing in my own kind of work separately from kind of academia in general. But I mean, I think Ida brought this up in the chat, talking about attracting underrepresented students in STEM and academia before kind of the college level. So like getting individuals interested in kind of, like you said, like stuff that pertains to their community. I mean, I think that is like such an important piece, because then you get excited about like, oh, I can do this because it helps my family personally, or it helps someone that's really close to me, or a group of individuals. And so making sure that the community has that input, I think that's also key. And that kind of also goes off with what Jamal was saying too, with like kind of creating your own kind of curriculum in a sense. Would it be too wild if we were in graduate school and we asked grad students to help build a curriculum of like, what would be great for y'all? Like how can, for your specific, let's say you're 5 of a cohort, what would you all like to take, like you said? So like, I think getting that stakeholder and that community input is super key to really retain individuals kind of in the academic setting in a sense. And that, I think that goes all levels. So like, it's not just at the undergrad level or just at the, it's just, there's so many things that you can do to really bring the community in to make that decision. So it's not all this, when things go from top down, it never works out.
Can I make a final comment about in the retention theme, right? I need to it's something that I often think about, which is like survivorship bias, right? Like usually it comes about when you try to tell everyone around, well, like, look at that particular successful minority, they have survived, right? Why can't you? And I think this plays out badly when you think about retention, because it sort of shifts the responsibility of someone thriving in an adverse environment to the person, right? So I think it's important that in general, we stop telling people from minoritized backgrounds, saying something like, well, you know, look at us or look at someone else, they succeeded, so you can too, right? This is using survivorship bias as a method to retain people and try to motivate people to stay, whatever, right? So this is bad, right? If people from minoritized backgrounds think that it's up to us to stay only, right? I think this is very bad practice, and it's something that I think about often. So I just wanted to mention this a little bit out of the blue here as a parenthesis. Sorry.
And also going off of that, it's so widely shown that to have change, it's usually started by those same underrepresented communities, or like to have more female representations. It's always the females creating a group to start to push more female representation. Like it's always those that need it, and those are not the people that should be pushing for it, and how we really do need better assistance for this type of movement. Okay. I'll then ask, how do we better encourage the younger generation of underrepresented communities to be interested in STEM?
I think Jamal said this earlier, and a lot of people touched on like different intelligences, but I think when I was younger, like, you know, middle school, high school, I always thought like you had to be smart to be in grad school, or like that was the primary factor. And then when I got to grad school, I was like, no, like you just need to be really determined and really care and be really curious about a factor. So I think just encouraging people to be like, you just need to care about something and you can be a scientist. You know, I mean, it's not, I mean, there's so many other structural things, but like, you know, the primary thing is not like how smart you are. It's like how curious you are, or how fascinated by something, or how interested in something you can be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of people have potential that they just don't know, and they have strengths in different areas that aren't wrapped up in your grades. So it's hard for them to even have the thought of, oh, I can do this. I can get a PhD, or, you know, I can go to grad school, because they just think they can't do it, or they don't have whatever their strengths are isn't really, you know, you don't get in a report card. It's just not there. So maybe diversifying the way the readout is of how they pass a class or how well they did in this course would help them realize that they can do it, just in maybe a little different way.
Yeah, there's I don't know if everyone's experienced this or not, but in a lot of public education, a lot of states, they have programs called Gifted and Talented, and they are some of the most inequitable programs across the board, because they base it off of grades. And then if you don't get a certain GPA, or you don't pass a certain like standardized test, I know in California we had like a test that we had to take, you're not invited to go into this Gifted and Talented program, where you got like all these other things where you would, I mean, for myself, I got to leave school to go to a different school with a group of individuals, and the whole day it was just science and STEM related. And so having just like right there, they already built that division in a public education. And so getting rid of those type of programs, because everyone thinks they're doing great or not, but they're actually very problematic and very inequitable. Because if you don't get into those programs, then you see yourself as, oh, I'm not smart. And then you start to have those feelings of, oh, I feel like I'm an imposter if I'm in somewhere. And so trying to get rid of those, I mean, I know like at this current level, our conversation, everyone's mostly like in the higher education sense, or in academia, but starting down at that entry level and getting rid of those barriers and not creating these differences between kids is super key. And if you're going to create those differences, then I feel like if people are going to start creating difference, then what are we doing here then? We need to do something different to really change it.
I'll also say, since we are on this level of higher education, that imposter syndrome is completely real. I have it and experience it every single day. Like, am I actually doing this? There's no day that I don't question if I'm good enough to be here and good enough to be applying for career transition awards. I'm just like, what am I doing? So I can't imagine how if I was like even more in an underrepresented community, how that would be amplified. And I can't imagine those difficulties.
I also challenge everyone to always try to move away from the word kind of imposter syndrome, because it kind of it has a sense of this connotation of like kind of like there's a cure for it kind of thing. Like that's because it's a syndrome, there's a thing that we can do to like and so I always try to push people like it's a phenomenon and it's something that's like not medicalized, like it's not in the DSM or anything. And so trying to just switch our own framework around the language that we use. And also when it comes to like imposter phenomenon or feelings of being an imposter, understanding that we don't live and work in a like social vacuum, that there's so many kind of social contexts and so many different social influences that as a society and our own institution and organization that we work at, how do we kind of dismantle those at the social and the structural level and not put it on the individual, being like, oh, the individual has to quote unquote fix themselves? Because that's the one thing I'm always trying to like pull away from, like, hey, we're not trying to fix ourselves, we're trying to change the system. And the system from changing the system, it's going to help support us in the end.
I really like that. I like phenomena. I'll use that for now on. Is there anything that anyone else would like to add before we move to the questions that came from the participants?
I guess I'd also say that like being a scientist or a grad student, it's not the most like lucrative position. And I can see like, you know, if you're from underrepresented community, or, you know, if you think about financial issues, it's like I could be a scientist or I could go do something else that would make double the money or something. I don't know, whatever, just an example. So I feel like just raising the boat for everybody and making it more financially more feasible for people to be in grad school or to do research would help a lot.
Yes, going to grad school is a privilege.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I caught myself doing this the other day too, just thinking like, oh, I'm going to grad school and I'm getting paid to do it. Like that was such a thing. And then I was like, oh, great, I'm making $26,000 a year. This is amazing. I'm like doing great. But then I realized I was like, oh, like I'm not getting paid anything. And like I could barely live. And I'm trying to go to school. Like, so like, how are we? I saw myself even jumping into that and being like, oh, it's okay. I'm getting paid to go to school. That's the whole point. And realizing that we need to change that mentality and like make sure that it's feasible for people to do things and actually live, and not just like, I mean, so many individuals have to send money home to family members or support family members in any sense. And how are you supposed to do that if you're only making $30,000 a year and you're trying to go to school and you're paying for yourself just to get through?
Okay, So why don't we start to go to the attendees, and please put your questions in the chat. I'll try to go back and see if we can answer any previous questions. Okay, so we have one. Based on your training and academic preparation, do you feel that you are properly equipped to advance your career in obtaining and succeeding in leadership positions?
No, scientists are not trained to think about leadership, which is sad.
Yes, we aren't trained to actually teach either. So, but we ultimately commit to a professorship if that's the role, if we stay in academia. So I also agree with Professor Aiello.
Please call me Clarice.
I agree with both of you. I mean, you're also not really trained to run a lab. So it's kind of just like everyone, I feel like everyone's like, everyone's like, oh, we're training you to run a lab, but there's no training. Like no one gets budget management training. No one, when you first start a lab, you're just like, here's all this money, how do I spend it? Or so like there's so many pieces that you don't learn. You learn to, I will say you learn to think critically. I think that's, I will take that away from maybe for myself specifically, or you definitely learn the piece of, I mean, actually you don't even learn really to communicate your science. You kind of just pick that up as well. So I mean, for myself personally, I don't think my academic training necessarily trained me to become in a leadership role. That all happened that happened after I finished grad school, when I was working under, I will give a shout out to my old supervisor, Dr. Letitia Wyatt. She's still at OHSU, but she definitely taught me how to be a leader and to really kind of run ship and get stuff done. So I think it's the people that taught me and not specifically the whole system that taught me.
Yeah, I would agree with everyone. I don't think there was any sort of training on leadership or advancing your career in general. For example, I feel like a big part of our career has to do with presenting your work, or like presenting or giving talks or presenting at meetings. And that's something I feel like I learned on the job, how to get better at it, how to put together a presentation, how to communicate with my peers, or how to get my point across. And I didn't feel like that was anything I learned in school, but more of just trial and error as I started a job.
I kind of always wonder how those business schools are taught. Like, are those students, you know, at the best MBA schools for business, are they getting that type of leadership training? Because I do not see that at all in the STEM fields. Okay, so we have an anonymous question. Diversity training seems to be more prevalent in the workplace, but do you see schools making more of an effort to teach these concepts before getting into the workplace? It seems like there would be more of an impact by teaching this earlier in people's careers.
And I definitely think that getting to individuals earlier, there's a huge benefit. I don't know if there has been any change, but I know when I was in school, there definitely wasn't any sort of encouragement or any direction in what career path to go down whatsoever. It was like you took classes that were, you know, part of the curriculum for like years. And the same, like my brother took the same classes, I took the same classes. My sister and brother, like younger brother, also took the same classes. There wasn't any sort of change that I saw happen, at least when I was in school and when I saw like my younger siblings go through school.
Can I also ask Z, Andre, and Justin, so now that you're in the workforce, how do you think the diversity training is there? Clarice too, since you're up there too.
Yeah, I don't feel like we had any sort of diversity training in general in any of my positions. It was kind of a topic that was discussed in like a company-wide meeting, like, oh, we're going to try to do this. And that was kind of the end of it. So there really wasn't that much involvement or that much, I guess, like shining a light on that as a problem that I've seen so far.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, not too much like explicit all hands on deck kind of like big team meeting. I feel like sorry, time has gone by so like blurred so much the past few years, but I remember like when like George Floyd's trial was going on, and that in those kind of incidents, like we had like that spurred some conversations and stuff, but then like I feel like this is familiar refrain, but like did any actual like long-lasting change come out of it? I can't really point to any specific policy change or anything like that. So I do think like we have an atmosphere where like we can discuss these things and be open with each other, which I appreciate, but I'm not sure on a company-wide like policy official like HR level has anything like changed about like hiring practices or stuff like that. So
I would say for myself, well, I just started my role about 2.5 months ago, and so I'm the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm actually the one that's giving those trainings and like producing them and whatnot. So I think even before I started my own organization, there was some all team meetings that had DEI trainings, and like we have a DEI consultant at our organization right now that's supporting me. So there was then, I think a lot of, not a lot, but some places are in the workplace putting kind of steps into motion. And then, I mean, director of DEI role is still fairly new, even though this role's been around since the 70s. Like it's not like they're really new, but the prevalence is definitely going up now. But I think there's a lot of things that I see that in kind of in a non-academic role or non-academic setting, and just kind of in the corporate setting, that we can take some of these things that we've seen work in the corporate setting and use them in the higher education academia setting. It's just that the two fields just don't talk to each other, and sometimes people see it as like, oh, if you are in academia or if you get a PhD and you leave, it's like looked down upon. I mean, I've had multiple people say like, so you're not using your degree? And I'm like, I'm probably using it more than you if you think about it. Like, I don't it's such an interesting thing. So I think it's still pretty in its infancy stage when it comes to DEI trainings in general across any organization. But I think academia is just a couple steps behind from what I've seen.
In my professional experience, diversity training has been pro forma, and diversity has been tolerated, not celebrated.
Okay. We don't have any more questions, and we're coming up on the hour, so maybe we can start to wrap up. Reagan, do you have any other comments?
Nope, we don't have any more comments. I did see Ida mention in the chat that NRMN has workshops on many of these themes, and I wanted to agree with that. I did put the links for the Social Scientist website, the NRMN website, and various other links in the chat at the top. And then you will all be receiving an email that has all of these links, and then a link to the recorded webinar if you jumped in halfway through, or if somebody wants to go back and check it out. But yeah, we're very excited about this webinar. We hope to have more with the social scientist community in the future, but we, on behalf of NRMN, I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists that joined us today for this very important discussion, and thanks to everyone that attended.
Thank you. And so you can contact every one of these mentors on the Social Scientist directly. And please feel free. We are here. We want to help. And that's how I enroll our mentors, is that they need to be enthusiastic about mentorship and helping the general public. So please feel free to contact them and to use the Social Scientists. And yeah, this was a great chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Y'all have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Reagan.
Hey.
I just wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to chat about before I head out.
No, nothing on my end, but yeah, I'll be posting that link to YouTube, and then I'll be sharing that. There is going to be a follow-up email that goes to all of the registrants, even the ones that weren't able to hop on the call. They're still going to at least get that link, and I'll be sure to plug in your the social scientist link in that email as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it was really great to work with you.
Yeah, it was great. Like I said, we would love to do more of these webinars. So if you have more ideas, I would love that. We can have meetings just to like schedule some webinars, because we like to do these monthly webinars. So I know we have a few Juneteenth webinars for June, but we're pretty much open for the remainder of the year. So I'd love if you have more ideas. We can even bounce them off each other and then just come up with some webinar ideas.
Okay. Yeah, so for webinars, we've just done a bunch where essentially I pull mentors from specific groups that we want to discuss. So if there's something that you want to talk about for like academia or in engineering, we have like scientists like talking about outreach. It's pretty much like whatever topic you want to discuss about, I can pretty much put a team together for it.
Yeah, that sounds so great. Well, yeah. And as you know, we're in the process of trying to like hire Johnny's position back. So until then, it's just going to be me. And so as I said, we only have some for June. So I will start looking into July and figuring out how we can create a webinar, and then I'll reach back out to you.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Danielle.
Thanks.
Have a great day. Bye.